Chris, for purposes of recording, you can either use that.
Okay,
That one.
is it on? It's got a red light on.
Now it's green.
There you go.
All right, there we
There
go.
you go.
Okay. All right. And I want to welcome all of the people from the city of DeSoto who have come here. I want to express my appreciation really to the city of DeSoto. You've made our job so much easier by annexing so much ground. And now that's your problem and not our problem. But I think that there are mutual issues that the annexation have brought up for us. A number of us recently, just this week, took a tour of the area and were better informed with regard to where DeSoto's begins and ends and what's going on out in the county in that particular part of the county. So we appreciate your coming and you're putting on a presentation for us. The more education that the county officials, both employees and members of the planning commission get, I think makes it more likely that we will make decisions that are not only in the best interest of the county and the parks that are out there, but also the city of DeSoto. So thank you for being here.
Just Jay Leipzig, Chris is a tough guy to follow. So I'll just say, reiterate, welcome. Glad everybody could be here today, and I'll turn it over to Diane. Look forward to the discussion.
Yep. So, yeah, thanks again, everybody here for coming. So I think what we'll do now is just maybe go around the room, do some introductions, and then we'll get going on the presentation. So I'm Diane Wickland, staff on Johnson County Planning Department.
Oh, Michelle Lineground, planner in IT.
Good afternoon, Sean Henley, Deputy Director of Johnson County.
I'm Zoe Brown, planning intern.
Chris Silent, Stewart Lord, Johnson County. Brett Thompson, DAP.
Right to Johnson County Planning.
Jim Meeks, and Aaron Wood, Johnson County wastewater. Jeff Dykes, Johnson County Public Works.
Jeff Elton, Johnson County Park and Recreation District. Lee Kellenberger, Johnson County Public Works.
Jay Leipzig.
Susan Meyer, County Manager's Office.
Brian Pedic, Facilities.
Brad Weisenberger, Community Development Director, City of DeSoto.
Hi, Mike Brungart. I'm the City Administrator there in DeSoto.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I think we have the brain trust here of the county, so and DeSoto, so this is great. So so our first speakers are Mike and Brad from the City of DeSoto, and they're just going to kind of walk through the area and what's going on in DeSoto right now. So
Sure, yeah, I can take it. Do I need that mic?
yeah, they're
We learned from Alan Swain, who is the, am I not loud enough? We good? Oh, do I need to start over? I said some good stuff there at the beginning. I don't want to miss that. Alan Swain gave he's the president of the Panasonic North America division. And he's from England, so he has a fascinating accent. You just love to listen to him. But he gave a presentation at the annual event for KCADC, where he specified that 4,000 of the jobs there at this facility will be engineering jobs. So that was a surprise to me, that the higher level of employment there, not just factory work. This isn't just factory work. If you look at Panasonic's corporate culture and their goals and vision and values statements, you'll learn pretty quickly that they build people before they build products. Employee retention is a big part of what they do. They want to be very much to be integrated into the community. They want to be a good corporate partner and a benefit to all the communities that they're in. So that's what gets me excited about Panasonic specifically. Their target opening date has slid. Initially was the summer of 2024. And everybody who's knowledgeable about building massive projects kind of took a deep breath when they heard that deadline. It has since slid a little bit. They're now targeting early 2025. I think the current target is March of 2025 for a start of operation. This says fully operational. It's actually the start of operations. So we'll go through kind of what that means here on the next slide. But before we do that, I guess I need to know what my slides are. On the planning and platting process that you're aware, so late last year, we annexed 6,000 properties, or 6,000 acres of the Astra site, and formed a tax increment financing district over that whole area, which I think was the impetus for this subcommittee to get together and understand that we need to have a look at that community in a park, that future land use plan. We've since moved the goalpost on you. Apologize for that. We've annexed the other 3,000 acres or so. So the majority of the former munitions plant is now in the city limits of DeSoto. The only exception really is the 400 or 500 acres that Kansas State will be getting down in the southeast corner of the site that is not part of the annexations. So that was the first step we took. The second step was to form that tax increment financing district. And then the third step really was the rezoning of 1,300 acres in the northwest corner of the property, generally bounded on Lexington and 95th Street, and then the east property limits. And so that was zoned to light industrial earlier this year. That includes the 300 acres Panasonic site. And so now the next planning application that we're going to consider with the City Planning Commission on December 20th is this preliminary plat of Astra Enterprise Park. This is the 1,300 acres that's currently zoned light industrial. We've shaded in gray the 300 acre Panasonic site, and then the building footprint here is shown. The footprint is 2.7 million square foot footprint. That doesn't include the courtyard, so it's carved out, but it's a 2-story building. The manufacturing facility is 2 stories. So the total square footage, I don't think we exactly know precisely yet, but gonna be somewhere around 5.2 million square feet of floor space. So the preliminary plat shows 9 lots, 5 tracks, total land area of 1,350 acres almost. And it does show parkland dedication here in green. One of the early agreements between Sunflower and the county at the time, back in 2004, was the commitment to donate almost 2,000 acres to the Johnson County Parks and Rec District. Some of that land has already been transferred under an early transfer. Bill, how much is that? About 500 acres? 130. Oh, I'm sorry. I was off a little. 130 acres. And that's largely, is that in this area? Yeah. So that's not in green, but and it's not part of the preliminary plat. But the rest of this in green, at least preliminarily, is slated to be dedicated to the parks. Panasonic site number 1. When we did the tax increment financing district, one of the steps of that is to approve the extents of the entire district, but also project plans as they occur. And we've actually approved 2 project plans for that. Project plan number 1 is Panasonic, the building that they've committed to build. Project plan number 2 is an identical cut and paste building on the adjoining 300 acres just to the south there. Panasonic has a land purchase option agreement for that parcel. They've made no commitments to moving forward on that, but we're very hopeful and working with the governor's office, the State Department of Commerce, that when and if Panasonic decides they need another facility, that it will be right there. And so very important at this time to account for, in everything we do, infrastructure, land use, staffing, permitting, all the planning we're doing now, important to account for that future opportunity. But we really think that's just the start of additional future opportunities, both at Astra and adjacent to that site as well. So that's the preliminary plat. Next slide. What do we have? Okay, this is the site plan. So we got late last week, we got the first of a phased approach to site plan approval. So in DeSoto, our planning commission is the approving body for site plans. So once the property's annexed, once it has the zoning, the next step in our typical, if we're just doing a Taco Bell, they come in with a site plan that shows the building and the landscaping and the utilities and how the roads are going to get, all the physical improvements to the site. And the planning commission looks at that and reviews our regs and says yes or no, and then they go build it. Well, with the enormity of this building and the kind of the design as they go aspect of what the Panasonic team is working on, we are initiating a kind of a phased process to the site plan approval mechanism. So the first, it'll be in 3 phases. The first phase will be to look at and review the site layout. So it includes the general, of course, the footprint of the building, its location and position on the site, parking, utilities, mass grading, kind of the bulk mass density considerations of that site plan. We will follow that early next year with some details about the architectural design, the architectural enhancements of the building, and some other finer details about the site. And then the last phase will be the finish up items, the landscaping and lighting plans, things like that. So it'll be in 3 phases. The Planning Commission is going to look at the first phase on December 20th. And so what we show here, just not to get too far into the weeds on the building, but essentially, there are 2 identical production lines that are represented by the north wing and the south wing will be 2 identical production lines. The battery that they're going to produce here is the same battery. It looks like a little AA battery on steroids. I can't remember the number, 2670 or something like that. They'll produce, once fully operational, the facility will be able to deliver 6 million of those cells per day. So it'll be a 24/7 operation, 365 days a year. So the main production lines are north and south. All the raw materials, or the bulk of the raw materials, will enter this courtyard from the east. So truck deliveries on the bulk deliveries will be separated, truck traffic separated from just the regular employee traffic, with truck lanes that come around the building and into the back. Of course, the batteries will be produced, and then the center wing is largely devoted to some admin operations, and then packaging, distribution, and then the finished product will come out by truck out the east. We haven't had a lot of specific detail discussion with the Panasonic team about building number 2. But the logistics people are leaving open the possibility that either the raw materials or the finished product or both may use rail in the future. So the Sunflower property does have access to an industrial rail spur that comes off the BNSF main line, goes really through DeSoto and enters the property on the north end. Right now, the rail is not in place, but the rail bed's there. So it could be put into use for this facility or for other future currently unknown users on the site. So that's generally the site plan. The only other thing I wanted to mention on the site plan is the provision for a substation. Evergy is in the design phase to construct a substation there. The capacity of that substation is 285 megawatts. And for comparison, the whole city of DeSoto uses about 50 megawatts. So massive power use, massive electric infrastructure needed. The discussions, on a more global framework, the discussions around power supply to this building, to a future potential building number 2, to other future potential users. Evergy has been very engaged in those, and they're doing a number of improvements to their system to accommodate building number 1 and set themselves up to be able to accommodate building number 2 and other industrial users in the area.
Might want to touch on the stormwater as well, since it's an important topic of the group today.
Stormwater drains downhill. Well, so and Lee's group, maybe Lee could probably address that maybe when you talk a little bit later. But yeah, stormwater is a concern of course for us. A development of this scale, stormwater detention, retention, stormwater quality issues all factor into play. It's not shown here, but they've got pretty massive detention structures planned for the east side of the site. Slopes from the west toward the east. Kill Creek obviously is down here. We're going to insist that we take a more global look at the stormwater management for the area and include Lee's team has engaged with one of their on-call consultants to help us look on a more global basis at stormwater management for not just for this site, not just for that 1,300 acres of preliminary plat, but really for the whole watershed that includes all of the Astra properties. So don't know exactly where that's going to land. Of course, Panasonic understands they need to account for stormwater quality and quantity issues from the site. So we're still working through details on that. Hopefully, I think there's opportunities for some regional solutions rather than just on-site solutions for each development. So not really shown here, but part of the mass grading plan, part of the phase 1 site plan approval will be addressing the stormwater. Okay, let's see what's next. Oh yeah, the buildings. So this is a rendering of the bulk mass, the massing of the building, and scale is just, it's really hard to get your head around scale. You took a bus tour, so you, I think, have a little bit of idea of the scale of the place. This would be a view looking toward the northwest. So this is the southeast corner of the building. You see the U shape there. Another view, this one looks toward the southwest. Just kind of you get a little feel for these are semi trucks parked at the loading docks. And then this figure on the bottom of the screen shows the elevation difference. There's about a 60-foot elevation difference between the floor slab and this would be 103rd Street as you drive by the site on the north. So you saw, if you took the bus tour, if you were able to, you can't really see. Do the bus tour go down Dual Drive? Did you go that way at all? It's hard to see the bottom of the excavation. They're excavating 24/7. They've been doing that for a couple of months. They hope to be wrapping that process up, first part of next year. You can't really see the bottom of the excavation. And so it just kind of goes to, this is a massive building. The height of these walls reach 80 feet. It's a 2-story building. So this is to kind of show that the sight lines, you're not going to see that whole thing. But it's interesting. Yeah, it's
just seeing the overall length and just, it's hard to appreciate this in the rendering that we set last time.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, next slide. This is kind of an artist rendering of the site from above, obviously looking toward the 103rd Street would be on the north there, and then Dual Drive or Main Avenue, and we still don't know what we're going to call that thing. Not sure. Astra Chet Belcher Parkway? We don't know. It's still kind of up in the air. There's other renderings out there that aren't necessarily part of anything we've approved, but kind of the Panasonic's kind of forward facing. This is what the thing's gonna look like, so. Okay, next. Well, not to be forgotten about, completely independent, but ironically on the same time frame is the other industrial developments that's happening in DeSoto. This is a 370 acre complex. It's at K10 there, borders the west end, and then 103rd Street on the south and Edgerton on the north. I'm sure you saw that on your bus tour. The grading is essentially done on this. We annexed it at the same time we annexed the first part of Sunflower, rezoned it last year. Preliminary plats approved. Pad sites here, as you can see, sites ranging from 30 to 40 acres, but the developer right now is seeking tenants and has a number of possible tenants that may or may not include anything having to do with Panasonic right now. That's a possibility, but really chasing this developer made this decision about this project completely independent of anything that's happening on Astra. So they were confident that the economic development landscape was such that distribution warehouse certainly is a need and still in high demand. There's still opportunities there, but the city's preference would be for more of a manufacturing use. They just bring better jobs. They bring less impact from traffic and trucks. And generally they're valued higher, so the property taxes are more, just a higher and better use for the site. So this is another 370 acres, and there's about 5.5 million square feet of building potential here. Again, these are still concepts. They're constructing Edgerton Road now. That project's about half done, so they'll rebuilding Edgerton Road. At the north, there's 95th, but the intent is to connect the interchange at K10 with 103rd Street. So it'll be a 3-lane section with bike lanes, curb and gutter, and a multi-use path along the west side. They're hoping to finish that up by this next spring, May or so. And their timeline is somewhat set as a result of cooperation with KDOT and KDOT's improvements along Lexington Avenue to prepare for Panasonic. Okay, next one. This, we talked about DeSoto's efforts more globally. Panasonic's a $4 billion project. There's lots of stuff to do. We could just focus on that and forget about everything else, but we understand that there's a need to think more globally and regionally and more aspirationally about what's possible. If you look around the country where mega projects have gone into communities, big or small, they're never the only thing that happens, right? Nobody on any side of this thinks that it's just going to be Panasonic out there operating just kind of alone forever. So we know that there will be direct spinoff generated from that by Panasonic themselves, their employers, or their suppliers, upstream and downstream suppliers, will want to locate in proximity to them. But then also that also brings other opportunities. It just creates momentum for other unrelated industrial aspects and properties to develop. But then there's indirect spinoff. You get 4,000 people on the site every day. You're going to start seeing hotels and restaurants and convenience stores and that sort of thing. The first things that we understood, and one of the first concerns of the public that you start hearing, a concern of ours too, is housing. Where are all these people going to live? Housing's been a burning barn fire problem across the nation for almost a generation now. It still is. This won't make it any better. So we started thinking about, of course, revisions to our land use plan, just like this group is like, oh, this is happening now. That's one known that we know. Now we need to react to that. And so what we've done is we've suggested some revisions, some early on revisions to our future land use map, just one small part of the comprehensive plan. And I think what we've tried to do, we've always kind of tried to do on these is a philosophy that the council has really kind of promoted, is that we don't want to get any more specific on a future land use plan than we are certain about what's going to happen on any particular property. So we shy away, we would tend to shy away from an area plan. We would tend to shy away from showing exact location for a school or a convenience store or until a lot of these other things are known. So we do have one great big known. We know there's 300 acres. It's going to be a great big project out there. And we also know that there's an industrial park down the road that's possible. But there's still a lot of unknowns on the Astra plant for sure. There's remediation timelines to go through. We need to be reactive to economic opportunities that they come. And so there's a lot of unknowns. So what we did revise the land use plans for the sunflower property, which is largely here. But mostly what we were focused on was the land use plan for areas outside of the property that would be more aimed toward the spinoff development that might occur. Mostly high density residential. So we've changed our land use map to show more high density residential in these areas, just north of the plant, and less mixed use, just to get a little more definition to that. The other thing you'll notice is this great big gaudy yellow line through the property. The landscape, the atmosphere we're operating in at the moment from a planning perspective is different than I think a normal sort of process would be. Normally, you kind of have 20 years. You set your plan out 20 years and you see what happens and you adjust each, as you go through. We think that 20-year time frame, if that's a framework we're working with, is compressed. It might be 10 years, it might be 5 years. The decisions we make now are gonna come to pass, whether they're good or bad, within our careers, our lifetimes. We're not doing this for future generations. We're doing this for us, and we're going to be the ones getting the credit or the blame for the decision, good or bad. So I think all that is to say, one of the best things we can do right now is preservation. We need to preserve future opportunities. We need to be mindful about infrastructure and capacities and partners, but we also need to preserve opportunities. And one of the things that's been discussed in the region for at least a generation is some sort of a better connection in Western Johnson County between, specifically here between K10 and I-35, but more globally, it goes all up in Leavenworth County. We're showing a line on the map that represents an intent to preserve a freeway corridor somewhere through Sunflower. Now, it might not be this line, but the line's there. And I know that's a main concern when we start to talk with KDOT and with the Department of Commerce and with economic development professionals in the region, and with Panasonic specifically. There is a concern that we may limit our ability to attract future economic development if we don't take care of some of these global capacity issues. How much water you can pump out of the Kansas River is a global capacity issue. How much sewer capacity do you have? Labor shed is massive. We'll get to that in just a minute. But another one's transportation. KDOT's looking right now at a study that looks at the K10 corridor and looking at its capacity long term, and they're doing that. But eventually, K10 won't be enough. And so, having this as an indication, there's a recognition for a need for another freeway type connection in Western Johnson County. I think it's a first step there. We do it with the knowledge and real recognition that as we know more about what happens here, this will be refined. We'll probably be changing this on an annual basis. This is not something that's community in a park's 20 years old now. I can't remember when it was done. 25 years old. This will not be the plan 25 years from now, I promise. So that's the message I'd like to send on this, and specifically on that and other corridors through, the east-west corridors are also very important to the county, to county public works and planning, and to the city of Olathe, and how you get the surface transportation back and forth. Major issue, we have a major kind of a natural barrier that is Kill Creek, and there's another one over here that's Cedar Creek. It's a very expensive barrier to get over, but preservation of those corridors in those areas and on the Astra side. It's very important. It's one of the things we can do now to set ourselves up to be able to react to changing conditions in the future. Okay, the next one. What's the next one? Transportation and connectivity. Talked about it a little bit already with the K10 project that KDOT's doing. And we'll get into a little bit more in this actual pending infrastructure. But the Department of Transportation understands and has been a fantastic partner in the Panasonic issue, but they're also willing to now be more engaged in a more regional conversation about transportation. So that's kind of what I was getting at with the connecting link north and south. But they're also looking at K10 connectivities. So the regional connectivity around Sunflower, I think that's it, expanded interchanges. This study that they're doing on K10 is going to look at additional lanes, possibly changes to interchanges and issues like that. So next one, what do we have? This, I don't want to focus on this too much, but this is kind of the pending infrastructure. This is the stuff that's going to happen, that we're designing now, that is essentially funded now, that's going to happen and needs to happen on a specific time frame to get Panasonic up and operating, but in their time frame, and also to provide services to Flint. So just real quickly, Lexington Avenue from 95th Street down till it turns into 103rd Street, and then out to Evening Star Road. KDOT's working on the design and build process to expand that 2-lane to a 4-lane divided arterial with a median, bike lanes, multi-use path, sidewalks. That project is in the works. Also included with that is a 1-mile stretch of Main Avenue or Dual Drive, the main entrance into the Sunflower site, which will be along the west line of Panasonic, 1 mile down. Actually, that doesn't go quite that far, but it's 1 mile to there. KDOT thinks that's about a $40 million improvement right now. The other thing shown on here is the sewers. So the orange sewers are what's going to be needed to serve Panasonic, and these lighter blue ones are what we're going to need to put in to serve the Flint development. So we've got gravity lines from the Panasonic site down to a regional pump station that is adjacent to the Parks and Rec department along 95th Street, that trailhead park there. It will then be pumped to a utility corridor along Sunflower Road, where we'll construct a new sewer line along Sunflower Road down to the sewer treatment plant is, I can't even, so far up there, I can't reach it, but it's along the railroad tracks off of 79th Street. And then we'll also have another regional pump station serving Flint just north of the interchange of Edgerton and K10 that would serve a gravity line from Flint and then pump into that main as well. Water line improvements as well. We'll have a new elevated storage tank here adjacent to Panasonic site. Our water treatment plant is essentially on site for Panasonic. There's not a lot of water line extensions needed. And Flint is in the service territory for Rural Water 7. So we're working with them very closely to make sure that any needs of Flint are taken care of. In addition to that, not really shown, our DeSoto will have to upgrade the capacity of our water treatment plant and our sewer treatment plant as well. So we've initiated those. So everything you see on this map is being done and will be completed by the end of 2024, essentially. So what's the next one? This is a little exercise. I'm not going to harp on this one too much, but it's a little exercise that we did. We had a committee formed to look at our more immediate needs and the immediate opportunities that will present themselves as a result of the infrastructure that I just discussed. There'll be land that wasn't served initially or now that will be in 2 years. And so understand that we'll have immediate pressures for development on these. So you take a look at, where the water lines are going, what the sewer is going to do, what the transportation is going to do, and you kind of boil it down to some specific parcels that are really kind of would be square bullseye targets for a developer that wants to come in and do something on those. So these are the ones that are outside of anything on Sunflower. So the next slide. We do have a childcare goal. As I mentioned, You know, the process of successfully implementing this $4 billion project between all the local partners and making that a success, we've viewed that as an audition for building number 2. And we had view it as an audition for the rest of the economic development community to look and think seriously about Western Johnson County and DeSoto and Kansas. One of the major factors in that success is whether or not the labor force will be there to support the operations. And we've known for quite a while that daycare and transit are directly linked to labor force, especially at the lower end of the pay scales, but also, you know, all through the pay scale range. So we've just started this, but we're focusing on trying to advance a regional daycare solution. Panasonic has indicated that as a need for them and something that they've been concerned with. We know other large employers would be the same. And so Panasonic hasn't ruled out the idea of an on-site childcare facility, but I think they'd rather have it site adjacent. And the daycare has to be either at the start of the transit route or at the end of the transit route. So all those things kind of combine, and they're really under this umbrella of labor shed. So we're just beginning regional dialogue with that. I know on the transportation side, Johnson County Transit, KCATA, and KDOT have been having discussions around that, and we'll continue those. So that's also something that, in partnership with regional cooperation, something's very important to pull together. What's the next slide? Yeah, you have this in your handout. This is just current snapshot of DeSoto housing. I won't really go over any of these numbers, but it just speaks to the burning need of housing in Johnson County. But we're also reaching out to the Douglas County folks, and as far south as Spring Hill, and DeSoto can't build. We don't have enough land to build all the houses that are got to be needed. So that's a regional discussion that we're going to have. What's next? Talked about a little bit before about spin-off development. So it was always kind of a curiosity in my mind. What sorts of developments do projects like this bring in? And you can kind of do case studies around the nation where these big projects have landed, where major employers have landed. And it's sort of the same group of spin-offs. So we've already had, it's just every week there's meetings with other potential developers about apartment complexes, both high-end and low-end market rate stuff and subsidized stuff. Low-income multifamily hotels, extended stay hotels with entertainment venues attached. Of course, the truck stop travel plaza, convenience stores, restaurants, and a concrete batch plant operator. Those are just some of the, that's the list of users that we've been in direct contact with that would speak to spinoff. We have engaged one of our consultants to do some case studies around the country and see what types of spinoff activities take place and which ones of those would be more beneficial for a community, and so that we can actively target that type of use and be selective about our efforts there on the economic development side. I think it's the last slide. It talks about the labor shed. It's interesting. The other thing that Panasonic talks about, and I think it's kind of common knowledge that Panasonic currently operates at the Gigafactory in Reno, Nevada. So the Gigafactory is another 3 million square foot building. Panasonic occupies about 2/3 of that building, and Tesla occupies the other third. So Panasonic makes their batteries, they ship them over to Tesla, and Tesla puts them in trays so that they can just plug those into the Model S. So that's what goes on in Reno. And Panasonic wasn't a part of the decision about the site location. But they have some deficiencies there. And one of the deficiencies in Reno is labor force. Reno is a town of about 500,000 people, and it's a service industry based labor force. Largely the casinos, they're service industry. Those folks generally aren't used to manufacturing environments. That's contrasted to Kansas City, where we do have a manufacturing base labor force, but also we've got 2.5 million people in the labor shed. The labor shed's really set by drive times. So in terms of labor shed for Panasonic, it's generally this several county region within a half an hour or 40 minutes of the facility. Johnson County represents 24% of that total labor shed in terms of population. And it's grown by 48% in the last 10 years, which is far more than any of the other surrounding counties. So I'm no expert on labor. I'm starting to, I learn more every meeting we have, but I know it's when Panasonic was trying to fix the operational deficiencies they may have in Reno, labor was among the top of their list. And they know that the daycare and the transit's a big part of that, the labor equation. So, well, that was it for me. How far over did I go? Should I apologize for running late? I'm not? Okay, all right. Any questions?
Like I have one question, Brad. You had mentioned about kind of working on the housing issue. Is the Soto Planning Commission, are you all still looking at the committee to go through?
Yep. Yeah, so the right. Oh, so so the question was about our sub. So we also have a subcommittee that was really focused on housing. You know, in July, we thought housing's a big need. So one of the first things they did was look at the revisions to the future land use map, which is now going to the council. Another thing they did was look at those opportunity areas map that I showed. That was a function of them. The third thing they did is look at our development code to see if there's anything in that could help with the affordability of housing. It really is affordability. And your chair-elect gives a really good presentation from a builder's perspective. Mike Kelly came to our chamber meeting one time, and he talked about the 5 L's of housing costs. He talked about lumber, which is cost of materials, labor, which is self-evident, land, the cost of the land, and that includes utilities, lending, which is interest rates, and laws. And the last L is laws, and that's what do your zoning regs say? Your zoning regs tend to drive up costs of housing unnecessarily, maybe at times, or are they friendly to housing costs? So we've taken that and we've had a look at our minimum parking requirements. We've had a look at setback requirements. What else, Brad? Was there anything else that came out of that? We did take a look at that. Yeah, the density, overall density. The last thing that committee is going to be looking at, and the council in general, is incentives. We have completely shied away from incentivizing anything that looks like residential ever before. And we may have to, that might have to change. So in terms of the affordability stuff. Yes.
This is Karen, and you had mentioned that, you know, one of the ideas is preservation. And so moving forward, talking about our future land use, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like there's 2 different regions that we should look at. One is the western area between Sunflower and the county line. And it looks like you're really not thinking of that area as really moving forward in terms of development anytime soon versus the area to the east. It looks like that might be a little bit more opportunity for development. And I was just wondering, do you have in mind any particular land use patterns that you either want to encourage in those 2 areas or not encourage?
Well, we might. So that area, the area west of the property, you know, the Astra west line and the county line, it's kind of a weird area because part of that's in the Eudora School District. You know, if you don't, you might be surprised to know that. And the thing about it, with the exception of the transportation corridor that might be pretty close to that area, there's not really a supporting infrastructure there. So long term, I think it's not really a target area for us. We can maybe contrast that for areas east of Astra, specifically the northern part of there, with the sewer that I showed that's going in. some of that area is going to be sewerable. Now, we wouldn't, look, the sunflower site's a unicorn, you know, it's easy annexing for one property owner, you know, it's gonna, so that action kind of gives the impression that, I don't want anybody to get the impression that's all going to develop at once, right? The southern half of that's going to be a while. But so the area east, it will grow in natural progression, you know, out from the city. I think that corridor along 95th Street is probably something that we should discuss, you know, pretty specifically. Those lots that front 95th and just kind of natural progression to the south there. But
Do you have
beyond that, I
any
don't really have a whole lot.
ideas about densities that you would like to see? Is it more of a,
No,
you know, because usually like we generally hear from cities that they don't particularly like to see the 2-acre developments with local roads, because when those are annexed, if they ever
Yeah.
are, they're just a lot of road that's expensive to maintain versus
oh,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a traditional
Yeah.
sort of stance to take. That's kind of planning 101.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think we'd be much different on that. Haven't had the discussion specifically, though.
Maybe there's maybe one last question and then we'll move on to try to keep it our timeline.
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a potential. Yeah. So on the cleanup, we could go, I mean, this is not a short answer. I'll try and make it short. Yeah, so it's probably closer to 1,500 acres that you could say is completely clean and has the seal of certification from the EPA that it's clean. Go do what you want on that. There's a good chunk of the rest of it that is clean, that the work has been done to remediate the environmental hazards there. But the paperwork isn't just, the paperwork takes 2 years on this thing, hasn't received the seal of approval. And then there's another portion that that the Army is still working to environmentally remediate. Largely that's toward the south end of the property. But that the environmental remediation is only one bucket of cleanup that has to be done. The other bucket is just demolishing all the old structures that are out there, all the stuff that's in the way of a site that you can go and develop. And the hang up from an economic standpoint, from a balance sheet standpoint, is the property's been upside down. The property hasn't been worth it hasn't been worth enough to, you know, it's upside down essentially. It costs more to clean it up than it would be to value. So that's the nature of the TIF, is to provide that revenue stream from Panasonic and from other stuff that happens initially on the clean stuff, to provide a revenue stream to go clean up the rest. Now, not the environmental remediation. The Army's doing that, and the Army's paying every dime of that. That's none of our, but it's tearing down the old buildings and making it ready for redevelopment. That's what the TIF does. And that's what we saw the benefit. And that's why we did the biggest TIF Kansas has ever seen, 6,000 acres. Now it's almost 8,000 acres now. That's why, because the economic development, that starts in the north end goes to pay for the cleanup, the demolition of buildings in the south. Not uncertified, but this is kind of conjecture, right? But it stands to reason that, of course, we need it all environmental remediated. We need all the hazardous stuff taken care of and certified, stamped. But we might not need all the foundations removed. You might not need the roads regraded. It might be an opportunity to have a use there without having to go through the full expense of that secondary cleanup. Yeah, so we're okay. Well, maybe county plans could follow up with you on that. We've been close contact with that. Yeah. We're working through regs that limit the size of any potential solar field, but. All right, thank you. I suppose you want the clip on, don't you?
No, I'll take this. No, my presentation is not gonna be nearly as sexy as that. And I don't talk nearly as long as Mike either. Yes, I will. Yeah, I could put on that vest. Maybe I'd look a little bit better. So I'll be brief, you guys. I think I only take about 10 minutes of your time. I just want to direct you to two handouts. The presentation, the slides are shown here, the blue thing, and then I don't have this handout in this map here that says areas recommended for future analysis. It's a watershed map. So thank you for being here today. Like I said, my name's Lee Kellenberg of Johnson County Public Works. And I have done the stormwater management program for the last 16 years at the county here. So for those of you that don't know, we historically have worked primarily with the urban area, with the incorporated area, addressing flooding issues that have been created over the past. So, but however, recently here in the last 5 to 10 years, we've kind of shifted our focus from being kind of reacting to the city's needs to taking a more upfront planning role and helping cities with opportunities in preservation projects like Mike mentioned in the future. So I'm going to cover some of that today. So one of the first biggest changes, if you want to go to the next slide, that we've instituted in recent history here is the shift from our focus to working on a municipal-based approach to solving stormwater management to a watershed-based approach. So here you'll see a map of the county, and you'll see the different groupings of watersheds. We've grouped these into watershed organizations 1 through 6, as shown on the map here. And planning thought it would be nice if I could come to speak to you guys today to talk a little bit about some of this focus areas in watersheds 5 and 6 for this area plan. So some of the items that we found both on risks that exist today, but also opportunities for the future. So with our shift from a kind of just reacting to the city's needs and to this watershed organization approach is that it's really beyond the scope of any one city to look at watershed management at this scale. So the county, we're stepping in and doing more upfront, some of the more upfront analysis and planning. So we've done watershed master plans for the whole county that have looked at a whole host of things, not just flooding, but we also looked at water quality, hydromodification, how our stream flow has changed, and erosion issues, and then things like, well, I'll get to it all. So this is really, these plans are complete now. We have a lot of data and information, too much for me to go into today, but they exist, and we can share with you any data that you want. It's all available. And really gives the communities in these watersheds kind of the opportunity to think big beyond their jurisdictional boundaries and look at a watershed-based approach. And also allows us as the county to kind of look at some of our priorities for investment as well. So as Mike mentioned, we want to incentivize more regional approaches to stormwater management. So we're helping the city look at a regional approach for the area around the Sunflower, the Astra Park. Next slide. So obviously flooding risk exists, today. And so one of the first things we did is we looked at our existing flood models. We looked for information from our cities, partners, reports of flooding from citizens. And so we mapped, this is kind of a risk map of existing flooding in Kill Creek, and down here, this area actually flows to the south to Meridazine. So but this area is Kill and Captain Creek. So you can see the little boxes. I won't go into each, but there's a lot of flooding that exists. Not as much as urban areas that we've had to address, but there still is flooding out there, specifically around Lexington Avenue and 95th Street. There's some significant flooding in the city of DeSoto as well. And those are identified up there in those boxes. So next slide. Similarly to our looking at our flooding risks, we looked at water quality risks. We have a lot of data. We've done a lot of monitoring data in the past, a lot of studies with USGS and different universities to characterize water quality impairments. And so we've prioritized watersheds that are high quality that we should be preserving, and areas that are low quality that need more remediation or more cleanup. So next slide. And then we looked at hydromodification. When you pave over a watershed, you put a lot of impervious surface on this. It changes the hydrologic cycle. It changes how much water can soak into the ground and is fed into your streams as base flow versus how much is just runs directly off and enters the stream. So these are yield duration curves. We compared Kill Creek actually as one of our baseline conditions. It's one of the least developed watersheds to all the other watersheds in the county. So these lines represent different how the stream reacts to on a given storm event by watershed. So this is Indian Creek up here on the blue line, Little Bull, Kill Creek, and then Big Bull Creek. So the anomaly here is obviously Indian Creek. That's higher at the high flows, but it's also much higher at the base flows, and that's due to increased flow from wastewater treatment effluent. So that's why the low end of Indian Creek always has so much more water in it. So next slide. So with hydromodification, more runoff generated more frequently, that leads to more changes in the morphology of our streams. So we see a lot of down cutting and incision, a lot of stream widening problems happen. So this is one of those opportunities I think is for planners to think about is where are streams going to laterally migrate in the future? Where should we maybe avoid putting homes or infrastructure? So we using LiDAR data comparisons, we can look at over a decade or however frequently we want, we can look at changes in where the stream bed has moved, where there's been erosion and deposition. That's what this heat map is here. To show you the stream alignment. Areas in green represent deposition, areas in red represent erosion. So that stream is migrating into the area where the red is. So if you go to the next slide, there's a lot of colors on this map here, I apologize, but same kind of scenario, more in a developed watershed. There's the red and green areas of erosion and deposition. Through some geomorphic analysis, we can delineate an active river corridor. That's an area where the river either has occupied or would like to occupy. Okay, so that can be mapped. So we have an active river corridor, and then we can buffer that just for a safety factor and call that an erosion hazard zone. So in this situation here, the blue or the orange crosshatch areas are homes that are in an erosion hazard zone. Some of them are actually in the active river corridor. So cities in Indian Creek and Mill Creek and Blue River, they're having residents that they're not in the floodplain, they're on the high side of the stream, but their backyard is being eaten up. Homes, the stream's encroaching on them. Same way with roads like this. This is, I believe, I don't know which road that is, but you know, utility, there's probably utilities in here, but also this roadway could be in danger of erosion in the future as well. So that's a good planning tool. Those active river corridors and erosion hazard zones exist. We want to start using those as a planning tool, just like we use watershed boundaries as a planning tool in the future. So next slide. So to tie it all together, we overlaid all of our flooding risks, all of our water quality issues, all of our hydromodification issues into one kind of general priority map. And then we started drawing circles around areas where we had overlapping risks and opportunities. And we were calling these our areas for, you know, future analysis or focus areas. So there's a couple here along Lexington Avenue, the confluence of Lexington and 95th, along the main corridor here. There's green boxes of areas. We mapped areas that have hydric soils that of a certain size, parcels of a certain size for conservation opportunity areas that we might want to consider preserving through conservation easements or other means because of the water quality benefit or the hydromodification benefit that those areas provide. So we worked with the Conservation Fund to help us identify those priority parcels based on their criteria. So anyways, a lot of information on this map. Again, the tools, you know, to look at different flooding problems, erosion problems, water quality problems throughout the watersheds. And one more slide, I think, Michelle. And so then we use all this information as well as how we formulate and how we prioritize projects now with the cities. So we're not just looking at flood presence or absence of flooding, we're looking at flood risk, we're looking at erosion hazards, we're looking at water quality improvement and preservation areas. So the data is available, it exists. That's a very high level overview. So they're very detailed plans, a lot of analysis and thought went into them, a lot of cooperation with the city. So they're out there. And since it has plan in the name, Sean thought it would be a good idea to come talk about it, guys. I'll answer any questions if there's time.
Thank you. Lots of good information. So we're kind of getting close to 1:30, so I'm gonna kind of try to wrap up here, and then if there's any last kind of minute questions or discussion, but just to kind of quickly talk about kind of our next steps. So if you flip over the agenda on the back side, there's just kind of the rest of our phasing. It's kind of our work plan or kind of the next steps here. And so right now we have two follow-up meetings happening on January 6th and January 27th. The January 6th meeting is going to be staff from Johnson County Wastewater, Johnson County Environmental, and then Parks and Rec. And then, and this might kind of ebb and flow here based on conversation. And then on the 27th, probably have the Water District 7. We kind of talked about water supply here earlier. They'll come and give us a presentation, kind of talk about water service and capacity. And then probably then also on that meeting. So kind of the goal is here, you know, that this subcommittee will ultimately give some recommendations and options for the update to the Sunflower Plan. Ultimately, it kind of gives some recommendations back to the full Planning Commission. There'll be some suggested recommendations, and then we'll move forward with that. So, so that's just kind of the next steps, next meeting dates. So if there's any questions or discussions, and Chris, I don't know if you want to have any final thoughts, or, and if you want to usually.
As we're closing in on the end of our time, I don't know that we have a lot of time for questions. I appreciate the information both from DeSoto and from Public Works. Thank you very much. I think that LiDAR stuff and figuring out where the erosion is going, when you see what happened up in Yellowstone Park because of a 100-year event that they hadn't anticipated, it just reminds you that we need to be really careful here, because we're going to see a lot more 100-year events. We're going to start seeing them much more often.
That's true. And I'll add to that, Chris, it not only affected homes and structures, but infrastructure. You know, obviously bridges, roads, it's a huge thing to consider. And it's helpful to get all that picture of everything together when we're looking at a land use plan, to be thinking about where future areas of development are appropriate or not appropriate. So it's good information.
And by doing this on a watershed basis and on a countywide basis, it really obviates some of the municipal issues, which, you know, are much more controllable if at the upper end, things are handled better. Right. That's great. That's great. Very informative. I appreciate it.
I've got a quick question. Our charge was kind of give a recommendation that we can get changes here. And staff kind of hasn't given us an idea of what they're envisioning, because what they're choosing for the development. And I just have a question. In this presentation and stuff, we have a couple more meetings. Do we need a couple more meetings? And if we,
I'll take a shot at that, and then anybody else can add on to it. So I think this next meeting coming up on January 6th, I think will be important, because we'll be hearing from, you know, wastewater, Parks and Rec, environmental. I think hopefully that's going to give us a picture of kind of the infrastructure that's around in this surrounding area, because really kind of what we're trying to do at the end here is to have some recommendations of either a couple of options, and I'll just try to do this quickly. One is, so here's the current plan. This grade area, obviously, is the area that's been annexed by DeSoto. So one option is kind of keep this keep the plan just with the remaining land uses that are still out in the county. Or we eliminate the plan and then we just kind of divert back to our existing policy areas around this fringe area that's left out in the county. So I think part of having that next meeting with the three groups that I just mentioned is to kind of gather some more information. I think that'll be it, except for Water One District, in terms of being able to provide us a good picture of what the infrastructure is, because I think that infrastructure is going to be able to help us figure out, okay, well, do we just want to stay with our rural policy area, which is kind of that 10-acre minimum, or maybe some urban fringe policy area, you know, maybe kind of around here where there might be a potential for sewers and more water service. So we can certainly maybe not need to have as many meetings as what we have on the back of this page, you know, because I think, like Mike said earlier, obviously the more area that's annexed, the less that we're kind of planning for. But Chris and Chris.
I would say a quick answer to your quick question is that phase 3 is where we're going to bring all this together and figure out what kind of changes to the area plan that we might need, and whether we need a meeting on the 27th or whether we can start phase 3 on the 27th, I think is just based upon what happens between now and the next meeting.
Chris, I was going to say the same thing. I think this idea of, meeting on the 6th things will kind of come together. I think we could certainly, with the analysis we've done, the presentations, we'll be able to speed up that phase 3 time and the phase 4 time, but maybe definitely meet on the 6th. We might be able to consolidate a little bit and not have the meeting on the 27th. But yeah, I think that's where we could expedite things a little bit.
This is Karen Miller. Just one note that Water 7 couldn't attend the January 6th meeting. So January 27th is the only date that Water 7. But if you'll notice phases 3, 4, and 5, they don't have to be one meeting each. I mean, it was left kind of vague when it would be. So you could just pull in, like Jay said, starting to talk and just discuss and start pulling things together on the 27th.
I think so. Any other final comments? If not, we really appreciate our speakers, the presentations, appreciate everybody coming and participating. It's helpful for us to get moving on this plan. So thank you, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks, everybody.